All right, so in this video, I'm going to go over review kind of all the methods we've been talking about as far as solving quadratics go. The last thing we're doing in this unit is word problems, which can be very confusing. So that's why I wanted to make sure I spend this time with this video kind of just going over the methods we've already covered, making sure you guys are comfortable with them. Okay, so the first method was graphing, which we actually spent the entire last unit on. So if you guys remember, there was actually 3 different methods of graphing. There was standard form, and that's the one that looked like ax squared plus bx plus c. There was vertex form. That's the one that was ax minus h squared plus k. And then there was intercept form, which was ax minus p x minus q. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about each of those 3 methods because you guys should already have some notes on those anyways. But just remember that there was 3 different methods for graphing. And as far as using graphing to solve a quadratic, well, if you're solving, then the point there is that the answers to your quadratic, so the answers are where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, so if you go through the whole process of graphing, whichever method you're using, I'm just gonna do a quick sketch over here. More sketches are not super accurate. If your parabola came out like this, well, that means your 2 answers are here and here. Okay, so wherever it crosses, that's where your answers are. Okay, but there's a catch. I want to put it in red right here. Graphing quadratics doesn't always work. Well, I'll take it back. You can always graph it, but it's not always the best when you're trying to find your answer. So it doesn't always work. Okay, so for example, what if your parabola, it crossed between 2 numbers? Like it crossed between 2 and 3. Well, I mean, we can guess at what the decimal is, but we don't know exactly what the answer is. Okay, so graphing really only works as far as solving goes when it crosses through exact points, which doesn't always happen. Okay, so that's the first method of solving quadratics that we went through, was graphing. The second one was factoring. Okay, which we also spent a whole unit on this as well. So I'm just going to do a quick overview. I'm not going to go into super detail. So in order for us to factor it, it has to be in a certain format. It has to be in standard. It has to be ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, and we had 2 methods we really used. Well, I mean, I take it back. We had 3, but 2 really big ones. The main ones were x method and modified x method. Okay, the third one, which is not going to be very helpful for us as far as solving goes, because it usually is more not necessarily quadratic. It was grouping, but these are the 2 main ones: x method and modified x method. Again, I'm not going to go to super detail in this video because you should already have some notes on this anyways. But when the idea is you make an x, right? And the 2 methods are very, very similar. The only difference is that the normal x method has an a value of 1. Okay, but basically you take a and c, multiply them together, that goes up top, and then the b term goes down below, and then we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to the top, but then add or subtract to the bottom. Okay, and then once you have those 2 numbers, your answer is what we do is we set our factors equal to 0. So set factors equal to 0. Okay, and then we split it up, right? Either one factor is equal to 0 or the other factor is equal to 0. And we get 2 answers. So set factors equal to 0 and then split up. Again, this video is purely just very recap. You should already have some notes on these in detail. Okay. But there's another catch, right? Solving by factoring, again, does not always work. Okay. For example, if you try to do an X method on a question and there's just no two combination of numbers that would work, then obviously you can't factor this to solve it, right? So factoring does not always work. It only works if the numbers actually work, like factor out nicely, okay? So it doesn't always work. That's our second method, okay? Our third method was solving by roots. This one was a relatively new one, okay? And the idea with solving by roots is that we solve by getting the x squared by itself, right? So we solve by isolating. It's a fancy word for get by itself. Solve by isolating the x squared, okay? And then we can undo that x squared by taking the square root. So solve by isolating the x squared, and then square root both sides, okay? And again, we do get two answers, right? Because whenever you square root something, be careful. You have to account for two possibilities, okay? So don't forget that when you square root, okay, there is always a plus or minus, okay? So we are getting two answers, one positive answer, or let me take that back, one positive possibility and one negative possibility, okay? But again, you're probably going to see a pattern here. This method does not always work. Okay. Typically, this method's good if there's no x term. Like if there's an x squared and a number, but there's no no value with an x in it. Because usually the x is what's going to cause the issue if you're trying to solve by roots. Okay. So it doesn't always work. The last and final method we've covered is the most recent one, and that's the quadratic formula. Okay. There's a reason I saved that one for last. So quadratic formula. Okay. Once you're used to it, it's really not too bad, right? So quadratic formula, it has to be set up in a certain way. It has to look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It has to be in that structure for us to use it, okay? So we have to know what a, b, and c are. And then we use this formula, which again, you don't have to memorize. I'll give it to you on any kind of test or quiz. It's negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, okay? And the idea is that we're taking our a, we're taking our b, and we're taking our c, and we're just plugging them into the formula. And like I said in previous videos, we're gonna let Desmos do all the calculations for us, which is perfectly fine. But make sure you type it in exactly the way it looks, okay? So the idea here is you plug in the values, and then simplify, okay? And I mentioned previously, if the square root value ends up being a decimal, you can stop and leave the square root as part of your answer, right? Just don't forget that plus or minus, because there is two answers here, okay? Now, the nice thing about this method is that this one is the one that's different from the rest, because this one works every single time. So this one always works, okay? Which means on like a future quiz or a test, if it doesn't say which method you have to use, you can use whatever method you want. So if you get really good at using quadratic formula, you can use quadratic formula for every single one of these questions, okay? Because it always works no matter what. I mean, sometimes your answer looks a bit strange, but it still works, okay? So of the 4 methods, I would say this one's probably the most important because you could literally use it in every single possibility, okay? So those are the 4 methods that we've kind of covered. Again, you should have like more like detailed notes already of each method. But the reason why I wanted to go over all 4 of these is because we are getting towards the end of this unit, and the end of this unit is looking at word problems, which I know everybody loves slash hates. But it's really important to make sure you guys know how to do it, because then we're just going to apply like a real world scenario to it. Okay, and that's going to be in the next video.